Great. Thanks, Gary.
Sorry. Thanks for making time again today for joining us. When we're talking about a busy period, you guys, no doubt, from the ASIN world have more than anyone over the last 9 months have been absolutely smashed with all this work. So we appreciate you making time today.
No, thanks for having me. And yes, I understand most of the group here will have obviously experienced some challenges as well over that nine-month period. Obviously, it's been quite challenging. We're still onboarding a lot of staff to help with some resourcing, but I do have some figures that I wanted to run through in terms of the boosting apprenticeship commencement wage subsidy and also the supporting apprentice and trainee wage subsidy, and just give some more information about the amount of money and the cohorts and how Vic is tracking in terms of those as well. So hopefully that'll be quite interesting for the group.
All right. Well, it's all yours. We can hand over to you. If you've got a PowerPoint, you can load that up.
I do have. So let me see if I can get this shared. Okay. So I'm just working through. Well, I'm trying to find where that one is. Okay. So let me just. Well, I'm not the best on sharing screens, but you should be able to see that one now.
Yep, perfect.
No worries. So again, thanks, Gary, and the AEN for having me today. Just the session today, I just wanted to run through a few things and then also take some questions at the end. I'm more than happy to take questions offline as well for any of the GTO partners here that do have specific questions relating to their business needs. So feel free to reach out as well. So just the content of today's presentation is just looking at the boosting apprenticeship commencement wage subsidy, the SAT wage subsidy, and also just to dive into the incentives for Australian apprenticeships, which will take effect from the 1st of October this year, and just to give you some ideas in terms of what those incentives are going to look like and how that might impact on your business. So just moving into the boosting apprenticeship commencement wage subsidy, as the group's aware, in March 2021, it was extended to include commencements up until the 30th of September 2021, with payments also extended out to a full 12-month period. However, in the recent budget, it was extended further. So it was listed in the budget papers that 2.7 billion would actually be allocated to extend the boosting apprenticeship commencement wage subsidy for all commencements up until the 31st of March 2022. So it's a great outcome in terms of apprenticeships and traineeships. It's having a huge impact in terms of the Victorian market and, of course, nationally. And I'll go through a number of those figures in terms of the uptake into this particular initiative. One of the key aspects there is that from when it was originally announced on the 5th and commenced on the 5th of October 2020, no changes have been made to the eligibility criteria. So that's really important to take note that although it was extended out for commencements, the criteria remained the same, such as federal and state government entities were not eligible, or citizens, they must be an Australian citizen or permanent resident, or meet the citizenship requirements as well. So people on a temporary visa, for instance, would not be eligible for a boosting apprenticeship commencement allocated spot. So hot off the press, I actually received these figures this morning from Bill Mollison, who requested them through National Office. So I really wanted to paint a picture of how the initiative is going, but also how Victoria is trending against that figure. So just up the top, I've broken that into a few different categories here, just on employers. 61,800 employers have registered their intent for the BAC program, with just over 15,000 employers from Victoria. So just a note there that obviously employers will request their intent or register their intent through the registration form. However, whether they move forward and claim that, that's a different story, or whether they will actually be deemed eligible is a different story as well, as there's a number of different criteria that they need to meet. But having a look there, close to 25% of all boosting apprenticeship employers are Victorian based. So that's really consistent in regards to the NCVER data in terms of the Victorian percentage of all apprenticeships and traineeships. We are tracking very closely to the population percentage as well. So that's quite consistent across the groups there. So that's pleasing to actually see. You might recall in October, Metro was still in lockdown for the first month of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement program. So we actually did see the first month Victoria taking a bit more of a hit in terms of the uptake into this initiative. In terms of training contracts, this is quite interesting. 164,000 or close to 165,000 training contracts have registered their intent for the program. That's not finalised contracts, that's training contracts that have actually been put into a draft mode into TIMS. So some of those might not have actually been approved and finalised, but it's just around recognising those training contracts and that intent for that particular training contract. 38,497 Victorian training contracts have registered their intent. So if we look at the data there, it's telling us that 23% of all training contracts are Victorian based. So that's very close to obviously the Victorian employers as well. So it's very consistent in terms of those figures. So breaking that down a little bit further, some of the intel that TIMS is telling us is that 17,600 employers have actually claimed for their BAC incentives. That also includes the 90 GTOs nationally, or the Victorian GTOs, and that relates to 47,700 apprentices and trainees. So you can see that the total volume of money that's been paid out just in terms of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement, so over $230 million has been paid out so far, with a lot more to go. If we break that down to just Victorian based, there's just under 3,000 employers that have finalised their Boosting Apprenticeship claims, which relate to 8,500 apprentices and trainees. So from the Victorian perspective, $44.4 million of payments has been made through this particular initiative. If we look at breaking it down into a percentage, it's 17% of those figures, or the amount, has actually been paid to Victorian employers as well. In terms of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement, and just some intel from our data, so Apprenticeship Support Australia, there's a high volume of claims that are being returned at the moment, specifically in the Victorian market. That's relating to the evidence that's being provided in terms of those claims. So payroll and also training evidence. We saw a significant volume of claims being returned in the first quarter of this year, and that was primarily based off training providers having delays with scheduling classes and getting apprentices in to commence their training. Obviously, with the amount of suspensions that were placed last year due to COVID, all the practical trainings being pushed back. So the priority for a lot of TAFEs and RTOs were to get those apprentices up to date in terms of their training. So just some general information here is around 95% of all registrations that are signed up currently across Australia receive a BAC place. So that's a high volume. Obviously, we are aware that there's some existing workers where they will not receive a place because they've been capped out of that 30 places. Just a breakdown, so 56.5% of BAC registrations are trade-based, with 33.5, I've got the figures wrong there, of BAC registrations are non-trade based. So you can see the large part of, or the large portion of those BAC registrations, well over 50%, are coming from trade-based apprenticeships. So just moving into the supporting apprentices and trainee wage subsidy. So just highlighting that program's due to finish in the next few days. So all claims must be submitted and lodged on or before the 30th of June. But just talking through some of those figures that the department have provided to us today. $1.4 billion in wage subsidies have been paid out through that SAT initiative, with $308 million paid out to Victorian businesses. That is inclusive of GTOs. The program has assisted 67,800 employers nationally and 16,800 Victorian employers. And it supported over 135,000 apprentices and trainees nationally, with 32,600 registrations occurring within Victoria. So you can see the extent of the program and the reach, both nationally and obviously across Victoria, across Metro and regional Victoria. But just some important points here in terms of that initiative. As I mentioned, there are a lot of claim forms that are still outstanding across Victoria. We are encouraging, and the department have been reaching out to employers to ensure that all claims are lodged before 30th of June 2021. These SAT claim forms are not like your standard AAIP incentives, because they do have a life on them. So they will expire on that date. There's no 12-month period. So just highlighting that it's really important to contact your network provider and get those claim forms if you have some outstanding claims, because you want to get those in before the cut-off. So they just need to be lodged back or completed from your end and received in by the network provider by the 30th of June. And the next topic I just wanted to cover off on with the group is just around the streamlined and simplified incentives for Australian apprenticeships. So in May's federal budget, it was announced that the AAIP, or the Australian Apprenticeships Incentives Program that we're currently administering, will be replaced with the new simplified and streamlined incentives program, which they've called the IAA. So the IAA was originally scheduled to commence on the 1st of July 2020, and then there may be members in the group today or attendees that might recall about 2 years ago, I spoke to the group I think it was Kyneton. Gary, forgive me if I'm wrong. It was due to commence this program in July 2020. So it has been pushed back a number of times, but I have spoken about this before to the AEN group. So it has been delayed. It's been pushed back a number of times, but it was announced in the recent budget that it will commence on the 1st of October 2021. The aim of this particular guidelines is around streamlining the incentives program and making it less confusing for employers when they are taking on apprentices and working through what incentives and funding that they may be eligible for. So you can see here that the program is aiming to reduce the number of payment categories from 31 different incentive types down to 14. So condensing that down. The living away from home allowance and the disability of Australian apprenticeship wage subsidy will remain unchanged. So they will still appear in the new guidelines, and they will be separated slightly different to how we treat the standard incentives. So moving through what that will look like, and just a caveat there is we are still awaiting more information to come out around this incentive, and that would be in receipt of the guidelines. They'll be released closer to the implementation of the new incentives. So just highlighting a few things for you to consider in terms of where this is moving from 1st of October. Just around the Certificate 3 or higher level incentives. These incentives apply for new worker apprentices and trainees, or if there are an existing worker, a National Skills Needs List apprentice. So the NSNL, so the National Skills Needs List, will be replaced to the National Skills Needs and Priorities List. So obviously a number of people in the group may have submitted their responses back to the NSNL report or feedback and gave some insight in terms of the National Skills Needs List, but it's just being rebranded in all the collateral that's been provided. So that's just a different terminology there, but does mean the same thing. But when you can break it down, you can see here the Cert 3 payments are still broken into the commencement, recommencement, and completion. I have highlighted for you just the differences in dollar figures. So you can actually see what changes have been made to the Certificate 3 incentive suite. So if I break that down a little bit more, if I focus on the commencement, again, it will be the same $1,500 standard commencement that will be payable at the 6-month point. The change here is around the $750 for regional and rural and skill shortage occupation. So at the moment, that's set at $1,000. That's going to drop down to $750 at the 6-month point, in line with that commencement. However, you will see down the bottom, you will actually also receive a $750 completion bonus as well. So in terms of that $1,000 regional and rural incentive that you currently would receive, you'll actually be $500 better off if that apprentice completes with you. So here, $750 if it's regional and rural, and also skill shortage. $750 school-based incentive, $750 mature age incentive at the commencement. And just a note there that $4,000 supporting adult Australian apprentices has remained unchanged under the suite, and that would be effective at the 12-month point as well, provided that you are paying at or above the federal minimum wage. The recommencement incentive hasn't changed, so that remains at $750 if you are taking on a recommenced apprentice or trainee. You also have here the completion incentive. So as I mentioned, there previously under the AAIP suite, there would be just a $2,500 standard completion incentive. Now under the new suite, it's being proposed that it will be a $750 completion bonus for regional and rural in a skill shortage occupation. And it's also a $750 school-based completion incentive. So at the moment, the school-based is only around a commencement, and then it's a school-based retention for if you continue to employ that apprentice after they've completed secondary school for a period of 12 consecutive weeks. So they're replacing that with a $750 school-based completion incentive as opposed to a retention. So that's some good news to those that are signing up school-based. And I know that there's a large part of the group here that do. And there's also that $750 mature age incentive as well. So just moving into the Certificate 2 apprenticeships in a targeted area. So it's very consistent to how the Certificate 2 incentives work under this program, where they must fall within a targeted or a nominated equity group. And those equity groups remain unchanged, but they're just classified as a targeted area. So they encompass Indigenous Australians, apprentices with disability, school-based apprentices, you've got mature aged, regional and rural, and also job seekers with severe barriers to employment. So they remain unchanged, the way that we would assess for the Certificate 2 incentives. The difference here is, though, that with Certificate 2, they are now planning a completion incentive. So previously, if you did sign up a Certificate 2, you would be eligible for a $1,250 commencement incentive. That's now been replaced and split into a commencement incentive of $750, but also a completion incentive of $750. There has been an additional or an increase in incentives for the school-based commencement. So that's gone from $750 to actually $1,500 in line with that 6-month point. And there's also a $750 mature age commencement. If I break it down into completions, as I mentioned, $750 for the standard completion and $750 for the GTO completion. That GTO completion is currently set at $1,000. So you'll see a drop of $250 there. But depending on the cohort, you actually may be receive the same amount of incentives, or you may be better off under the new suite. And that was one of the key focuses under this initiative, is that the incentives will be for most of the scenarios the same or better off. And I use the example, I think I had written down an example here. If you are signing up as Certificate 3 school-based in a regional and rural skill shortage area, the current value of incentives that you would be eligible for would be $5,750. That increases up to $7,000. So you might find that some of these incentives will help you determine some areas or opportunities that you might want to get into. I do have some flyers that I can distribute to the group that were provided a few 18 months ago in terms of this initiative, and that might help paint the picture a little bit better in terms of how those incentives will flow across the apprenticeship arrangement. So as I mentioned before, leading up to the 1st of October, new guidelines will be released closer to the date, and also fact sheets will be made available across the department's websites. One area that I haven't spoken about today, which is the additional identified skill shortage incentives. So that's the $2,000 commencement and incentive, or at the 12-month point, and the $2,000 at completion. That still will be available under the new suite of incentives as well. So that will be included. So that's why I've just separated that out, but that obviously is based off the skill shortage list, but looking at those 10 particular occupations that sit within that list that are deemed a priority. There will be additional funding there if businesses are, or your host employers are taking on an apprentice that's additional to what they had in the past. Just in terms of grandfathered clauses, so where apprentices are signed up prior to the 1st of October 2021, sorry, they will remain under the current program, which is the the Australian Apprenticeship Incentives Program. For those apprentices that commence on or after the 1st of October, they will be assessed under the new suite of incentives. One of the areas that I did want to highlight is the removal of the part-time incentives. So under this current guidelines, you will know that if they are part-time, it's a part-time completion incentive of $1,500, for instance. That has been removed, and it appears that part-time arrangements will be returned back to the full-time funding that they were back, I think, in 2012, 2013. So if you look at some industries that primarily take on part-time apprentices and trainees, you're looking at retail and hospitality, which is a huge industry, or huge industries that look at part-time arrangements. It appears that they'll be returned back to full-time incentives, so the $4,000 standard incentives there. So they'll be better off under the new program. And as I mentioned before, incentives under the IAA will be at equal or better off for most of the apprenticeship arrangements. So obviously it's case by case, but more than happy to chat to you offline if you do have particular questions in terms of this this initiative. Obviously, we're coming up quite quickly to the end of financial year, so this will be moving pretty quickly in terms of moving through and announcing a little bit more in terms of this program. But in terms of the incentives under the IAA, obviously they will be on top of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement Wage Subsidy. Businesses still will be eligible for that program and this particular program as well. So just to highlight that. So that was really just giving you a bit of an overview in terms of what those incentives will look like come 1 October, but also giving you some figures and data around how the wage subsidies have impacted on the Victorian market. So more than happy to take any questions that you might have in terms of any of those points that I've covered off today.
Thanks, Jared. That's a great wrap up. Your last comment there was probably around the question I had for you. Now that they've extended the back till the end of March, do you think they're going to move the commencement of the IAA to the end of March as well, or you think they're going to have an overlap?
It's interesting because the boosting apprenticeship wage subsidy and also the supporting apprentice wage subsidy are embedded across our current guidelines. What's unique is in the March budget announcement, they did announce both the extension to the program, but also the implementation of the new incentive framework. So for me, I've seen this pushed back 3 times already. It could be closer to 4, but I'm hoping that they will lead into this incentive framework. One of the areas where there will be a huge increase in the amount of incentives is the hospitality and retail. And you think of the impact that COVID's had across those particular industries, it would be really nice to actually be able to see more trainees signed up in those particular qualifications.
Yeah.
So
just for the members' perspective, in a couple of weeks, we'll try and get Linda White on to give us some hard answers around some of these things. So I know at the moment, 1st of October will come around fairly quickly and you guys are all preparing for it. But my gut instinct tells me it's going to be pushed back because it is quite generous to have both of those programs running simultaneously.
It is. I do hope that they commit to the 1st of October. Obviously, there's a lot of work from a network provider's perspective to change over, and you're assessing across 2 different guidelines and administering that. In terms of the boosting apprenticeship wage subsidy, we're seeing a huge increase in terms of the commencement numbers. It would be easy for it to be all aligned, and they would be switching over to one particular guidelines come 1 April 2022. However, yeah, it's interesting that they've announced it in the same budget. So yeah, we'll wait to see, and hopefully Linda's got some clarity for us.
Yeah, and I guess my other concern is we might run out of the 270,000 commencements under the back before March as well. So we're going to have another group of school leavers by October, and we would normally have well over 100,000 commencements by, you know, that standard sort of traditional recruitment period. So yeah, look, we really appreciate your presentation today. I know we're out of time. If anyone's got any specific questions, I see Narelle's got a hand up there, so go for it, Narelle.
Just really quickly, can I first of all, thanks Jared for your time. Can I just confirm? So you're saying to us that it doesn't matter the hours worked, whether it's part-time or full-time, or what the capacity of the hours is that the trainee or apprentice is working, that the IAA is applied as per the full-time rate.
Correct. So yeah, so with the documentation that I've got, the removal of part-time incentives, it does allude and it does look like part-timers will be assessed for the standard suite of incentives. So that's the commencement and the completion. So they're removing the part-time clause, which means that part-timers and full-timers will be assessed the same way moving forward. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, like all of our presentations, they'll be on our website next week. We've got a recording of this session and the PowerPoints will be there separate as well. Jared, really thank you for your time today. I know it's a busy time for you, nearing the end of the financial year as well, and trying to tidy up a few things. So thanks for making your time and effort. Everyone, thanks for your attendance today. We've got one more presentation tomorrow, 10 to 11. This is with the Victorian Trades Hall. They're going to give you an update on their Women in Trades program and how GTOs can help and participate in that program. So thanks, Jared. Thanks to everyone for making the time today.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Cheers.